We are talking politics with just weeks to go before the midterm elections. And today we're going to focus on Latino voters in Pennsylvania. This is a growing population in Pennsylvania. And as you grow in numbers, you also grow in power. Now, it is important to point out that their backgrounds and views on different issues and candidates vary. And so with me today to talk about the dynamics and the importance of Latino voters is my Telemundo 62 colleague, Valeria Aponte Feliciano. She is joining me today for this political conversation. Valeria, thank you so much. It's great to be with you.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for having me here and for talking about this important topic that definitely can define elections. And like we've been talking in the past, candidates need to pay attention to the Latino community.
Yeah, we have a new NBC 10 and Telemundo 62 poll that we're going to share some of the numbers from Latino voters in Pennsylvania, talking about what is important to them and how they feel about the candidates. And we're going to go over some of the information we're getting from that poll. But let's start with the issue of the diversity of this population and what we really need to keep in mind when we talk about Latino voters and the Latino population in Pennsylvania, Valeria.
I think let's start off by saying you can't put the Latino population in a box thinking that we are all the same. We are all so very different, especially not only when it comes to like where they come from, where we come from, but also even in our own community, we're so different. Like I'm from Puerto Rico, and I can tell you my priorities are completely different than some of the priorities in my own family. We're all so extremely different. And I think in the past, what we've seen, and when you speak to experts, when you speak to Latino voters, also undocumented immigrants who will soon also become US citizens, they feel that candidates put them all in a box. Like what Latinos only care about is immigration. And that is so completely false. And that is something we saw so clear in the 2016 election, where President Trump won and got a lot of Hispanic votes. And even though he didn't win in 2020, the Hispanic vote, the Hispanics that voted for him also increased in turnout because he didn't focus only on immigration, but also spoke the language of a lot of the Latino families.
Yeah, how does this tend to impact the types of things that are important to Latino voters in terms of their backgrounds, in terms of their families? How does that impact the things that really motivate them when it comes to making decisions in elections?
Well, to be honest, Latinos are extremely close. Families are extremely close. So when it comes to family values that a candidate brings, that is something key. Religion still plays a huge role in a lot of Latino families. Also, the economy, also crime, when it comes to this message of freedom and liberty that the United States has promoted for years and years. And that's why we saw a lot of Venezuelans, a lot of Cubans voting for President Trump, because it's families that escaped communism and escaped a dictator. And they felt that Trump was, a candidate that fought for their rights and was making sure that the United States would not fall into the same thing, even though we're not close to that ever happening here. However, you know how Trump and his campaign made it seem like candidates like Bernie Sanders would bring that type of politics that we've seen in Cuba and Venezuela, and they kept repeating it over and over again. So that's why a lot of Venezuelans and Cubans still support Trump, and if he were to run in 2024, would support him.
And that's one of the questions that we actually ask in this poll, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But first, let's remind people how large of a population we are talking about here in Pennsylvania. More than a million people. But there are more Latinos in Pennsylvania eligible to vote than are actually showing up at the polls. And I know that you got some recent numbers on that.
Oh, no, 100%, Lauren. And let's talk about that, because the biggest Hispanic population here are Puerto Ricans, Boricuas like me, which immediately can register to vote because we are US citizens. So the moment that a Puerto Rican moves to the United States, to the mainland, and they're over 18, they can register to vote. However, the stats that we've seen is that a lot of Hispanics that are eligible are not registering to vote. According to Voto Latino, just here in Pennsylvania, there are 350,808 eligible voters that are unregistered. And across the nation, it's 12 million Latinos that are eligible to vote, but not yet registered. That's a huge number. Can you imagine if all of them registered to vote and actually voted, the impact they would have in an election?
And that puts a lot of pressure on the period that we're in right now, where people can still register to vote. The deadline in Pennsylvania is in several weeks in October. And that means that right now, groups are out there on the ground registering people across the state. And it's a good reminder of how important that sort of registration process is. You first got to make sure that people are registered to vote before you actually convince them sometimes, who you want them to vote for. So
Yeah,
go ahead.
no, 100%. It's all about the education also. You perfectly mentioned it. It's you don't only have to focus in convincing them to vote for a specific candidate. You have to educate them about the importance of going out to vote, the process.
Yeah, period. That's the first thing.
It's a whole education process, but you have to do it because at the end of the day, your voice matters and nothing will change if you don't go out to vote.
So let's talk about some of the issues that are motivating people this year in Pennsylvania. And we asked Latino voters in Pennsylvania what their top issues are. And let's take a look at the very top ones here. These are the top four. Economy and inflation, 37% there, almost 40% saying that is their most important issue. Crime and drugs coming in 19%, immigration and border security 11%, and abortion 8%. And I found this interesting also because we hear this year often Democrats are spending a lot of time talking about abortion and Republicans are spending a lot of time talking about crime. And yet when you really look at what these voters in Pennsylvania are caring about, yes, crime and abortion, they are on the list, but they're not the top one. Economy and inflation, that is topping the list. The things that are important to the budgets of their family and how much they're paying for things when they go to the grocery store, when they go to the gas station. So it's interesting that some of the other things that candidates are spending a lot of time talking about, is that message going to be something that convinces people?
And I find it also very interesting because when you go out and talk to people, the first thing that they talk about is economy and inflation, how it's affected their pockets when it comes to gas, products, grocery, rent. And that's also been one of the reasons where a lot of people have left where they live to go live in a cheaper place. And it really is a topic that everybody, it crosses both lines when you talk to people, Democrats, Republicans, independents. They all are concerned about the economy, especially when they hear a possible recession. That freaks everybody out. And here in Pennsylvania, we see this crisis when it comes to crime, especially seeing how the majority of the victims or the suspects are young people. So it's not very surprising to see these numbers, but that is something that candidates should be very aware. And sometimes is as simple as just going downstairs to the coffee shop and talking to someone. And immediately, that is the first two things that they mention. It did surprise me, to be honest, seeing immigration and border security so high, just because we are not technically a border state. However, it shows how informed and how aware people are about what is going on when it comes to immigration and how interested they are. We don't see a lot of commercials here when it comes to the gubernatorial race, and I would even say the Senate race when it comes to immigration. But it is interesting that people are here in Pennsylvania thinking about that.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this, that there are there are issues that are important to you because they affect you personally, and they affect your family personally. And there are other issues that are important to people because they just care about them in general, and they can understand the situation of others. And you were explaining to me the difference between how Puerto Ricans may view that issue compared to other Hispanics in Pennsylvania.
No, exactly. That's a great example that you bring. If we just look at the Puerto Rican population, for example, before coming to Telemundo Philadelphia, I worked 5 years in Telemundo Arizona. I covered immigration every day. And a lot of my followers on social media are from Puerto Rico and didn't know much about immigration reform, DACA, the issues of the border, why people were crossing illegally in the border, because it doesn't affect them directly. So when we look at the voting aspects, that's not a priority for the majority when deciding a candidate versus the economy. Many Puerto Ricans come to the United States for better jobs, better salaries than what they would have back in the island. Same thing when it comes to crime, looking for a place where they feel safer, where they can raise their families. So it's not a surprise that when you speak with them, those are their two priorities.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about how people are responding to the candidates as they are talking about these issues and talking about each other a lot of times. Let's start with the governor's race and what we're finding in this new Telemundo 62 NBC 10 poll of Latino voters in Pennsylvania. When you look statewide, Josh Shapiro, who is the Democrat in this race for governor, getting 60% of people saying that they are supporting him, 24% saying they are supporting the Republican candidate, Doug Mastriano, for governor. And those are pretty lopsided. Those are pretty lopsided numbers. We also are seeing 14% undecided. So there are folks out there who may still be able to be convinced by one or the other. But these are pretty lopsided numbers, and we also are seeing differences in different parts of the state in terms of where each of these candidates are doing really well. Josh Shapiro, the Democrat, doing really well in this area, in Philadelphia and in the surrounding suburban areas. That's where he's from. He's from Montgomery County. People here know him very well. Also, you've got lots of Democrats in Philadelphia, of course, and in the surrounding suburbs. Those have turned blue, even bluer in recent years. And then the Republican, Doug Mastriano, doing the best in terms of statewide for him. His best area is central and western Pennsylvania, but still only coming in with 30% there. But that is sort of the best area for him. When you look at these governor's race numbers, what stands out to you?
I think it's really important for people to understand that when it comes to polls, you can't just look at the statewide. You have to look at specifics, like you were discussing, the areas where these people live in, the ages, the gender, also the party registration, and the undecided, because you and me know very well that it can change last minute. 2016 taught us a lot and how everything can change last minute. So a lot can be done. So I think it's very important to see these numbers. And like we say in Spanish, no se puede cantar victoria. You can't start celebrating already. We still have a far way to go, even though it's just a month away, the elections. I think what stands out for me the most is the independent vote, that we know how important that one is for the candidates. Even though you see such an advantage to Shapiro compared to Mastriano, again, that can change depending on the campaigns and how they mobilize this next month. And again, the whole undecided and the other, it can be so different in just a month. And that's why campaigns need to pay attention to these numbers and to all the issues that we've been talking about what people really care about.
Yeah, and you mentioned the independents. What's interesting here also in this poll is that in the governor's race, the independent voters in this poll are breaking for Josh Shapiro. 52% of them are going to Josh Shapiro, 29% to Mastriano. But if we go over to the Senate race, which is also a huge statewide race in Pennsylvania, and you're talking about the same voters voting in both of these races, the independents are breaking more for Oz. 47% for Dr. Mehmet Oz, the Republican, and 32% for John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor here in Pennsylvania, the Democrat. So these appear to be split tickets.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best way to say it. It's a split ticket because they are not voting for whoever their party is putting as a candidate. They are paying attention to each candidate and what they are bringing to the table. So this is something that they should be paying attention. And also, if you're a Democrat, be concerned, because we're talking about the Senate, Lauren, which is right now 50-50. And the situation here in Pennsylvania is the same situation in Arizona, which also has a race for the Senate seat. and it could flip. And that could probably be the worst nightmare for the Biden administration, to get a Republican Senate. Because if it's nearly impossible to get anything passed by the Senate now, imagine if if the majority is a Republican.
Yeah, it definitely could change the last 2 years of the Biden administration. Before we leave the Senate, we'll let you know that the way things came out in this poll, the 53% going for the Democrat John Fetterman, 35% for Oz, 9% undecided. So fewer undecided voters in the Senate race than in the governor's race. But Valeria, you were talking about the sort of national perspective. And we did recently have a national NBC poll taking a look at Latino voters across the country. And the way things came out there was that 54% said they wanted Democratic control in Congress. 33% said they wanted Republican control. Now, that is a national poll, and of course, we have these elections state by state, but just interesting to see where things stand when you take a broader look at things.
Well, it is definitely interesting because, Lauren, that same poll, the majority of the people so far disapprove the Biden administration's job. They're not in favor of what he's done, and they're not happy about it. However, the same poll shows that they trust more a Democratic-controlled Congress when it comes to the most important issues for them. So again, it shows that voters are not focusing on a party. They are voting on candidates, and candidates need to pay attention to that independent vote, because that can change. Going to our poll, like we were talking about, just the Fetterman and Oz, Fetterman, 32% independents would vote for him, but Oz 47%, but there's an undecided that's 16%. That's a really tight number right now, and that can change in the next month. And that's why, again, I sound like a broken record, but it's more for candidates to understand. They need to listen to their constituents and understand that they are concerned about so many things right now, and some candidates might not be focusing on that. Like we were mentioning, the abortion is something that a lot of Democrats are talking about, but when you talk to people in the street, not everybody is talking about it.
No, and the other thing that comes into play as we head toward this election are people who are not on the ballot, and people like President Joe Biden. He is not on the ballot this year. However, how people feel about him and the job he is doing, that does play into things. And so we also asked people about that as we did this poll of Latino voters here in Pennsylvania, and we found that 49% said they approve of the job that he is doing, and 43% said they disapprove of the job that he is doing. And, as we sort of look at the breakdowns of those numbers, you do have what you would expect in terms of more Republicans saying that they disapprove, more Democrats saying that they approve. And the independents, as you and I have been talking a lot about, 50% of them said that they disapprove of the job that President Biden is doing, which is very interesting.
And it's similar to the result of the national poll. And that specific point, it is interesting because independents played a key role in states like Arizona and Pennsylvania to give Biden the win at the end.
Yeah, and we also asked about former President Trump. We definitely have seen him play here in the Pennsylvania races. He endorsed both of the candidates in the big statewide races who ended up winning their races, Dr. Mehmet Oz for Senate and Senator Doug Mastriano for governor. He has had a rally with both of those men. And we now are seeing in this poll with 62% saying that they would not vote for him if he ran again in 2024, 32% saying that they would vote for him again. What do you take from that?
I take that Trump still has some support amongst the Hispanic community. However, maybe not the same support that he had before the 2016 election and after the 2020. I think a lot of people are waiting to see what happens in the midterm elections, to see what candidate the Republicans put. But Trump is still influencing a lot of people, a lot of candidates here still when it comes to that. So I think we have to wait and see. I think, again, it's very interesting to see the fact that independents said no to Trump according to this poll, but they said yes to Oz, even though Trump endorsed Oz. So we have to see what happens in this coming up election and see how things change.
And before we run out of time, I want to circle back to some of the issues that we were talking about, that candidates are talking about, that their surrogates are talking about, that people who knock on your door and ask you to vote are talking about. And there's been so much focus on abortion, and I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what that conversation is like in the Latino community and communities, in different Latino communities, and how it may how we may need to understand sort of the dynamics of those discussions and how they may differ from other discussions that candidates might have with other parts of their constituencies.
And it's good that you mentioned that, because the way abortion is spoken in Latino communities, it's very different than in other groups, or not talked about at all, since abortion, it is still a taboo subject when it comes to discussions, when it comes to Latino families. When you speak to people, at least in the streets, many are still pro-life, but a lot has to do with the lack of education and the lack of resources when it comes to this topic, which benefits those candidates who are, quote unquote, how they call themselves pro-life. They are against the right to an abortion, and they do target the Hispanic communities. That's why still till this day, even though we're in the 21st century, abortion is not a topic that would get the Latino vote. However, if you do speak with families that are completely against the rights to an abortion, you could get their vote that way. But it's not top of their mind. I mean, just by speaking to people in the community. However, times have changed, and the education has increased when it comes to the rights to an abortion, of what is at stake by taking that right away. And that's why, to be honest, you see abortion as the fourth priority of Hispanic voters here. I would say a couple of years ago, it wouldn't even have been top 10. However, things are changing. I think all has to do with education and the resources provided out there to people, again, when it comes to the rights to an abortion and what's at stake when you eliminate that right, and who is really affected by that right. And before I finish my thought, religion also still plays a huge role when it comes to who Latinos vote for. But it's all changing. I do not want to say that all Latinos think the same way and let their religion define their candidate. I think we go back to how we started. You can't put every Latino in a box. You have to speak to every person separately. Every person has different priorities. And let's not forget, there's some people who don't express where their priority is, but they will in the ballot box, and might not be open to saying, I am pro-abortion rights, but deep down, they do respect a woman's right to choose, and in the ballot box will vote against a candidate who is against abortion rights.
Yeah, and one of the biggest undecided numbers we saw in this poll was women in the governor's race. 18% saying that they are undecided on who they're going to support in the governor's race. And that race has had a lot of focus on abortion. So that is one of the places where you wonder sort of what people might be struggling with in terms of making that decision and weighing different things. That number stands out among all of the things that we have seen as just a very large number of voters saying that they haven't made up their mind yet.
And I agree with you 100%, because like we've been talking, it's no surprise that the economy, inflation is number one, followed by crime and drugs, then immigration, which is constantly in the news, either Republicans attacking Biden's stance, Biden trying to have a solution to what's going on the border, but the reality, it's so much more complex. And we can have a whole podcast just to talk about immigration reform. But the fact that
I'll
abortion
put
is
that on the list, Valeria.
let's put it on the list. Immigration reform. We'll have another 25 minutes. But the fact that abortion is number 4 when it comes to Latino voters is huge, and it shows how times have changed. And it is an important issue for Latinos. Maybe they don't say it out loud, but deep down, they know it's important to vote in favor or against a candidate based on what they think about abortion rights.
Really interesting conversation, Valeria. Thank you so much for your perspective and your knowledge of the communities here in our area and across the state. It really adds to our coverage both on Telemundo and also on NBC 10. So I look forward to talking to you for the rest of the campaign and then on to the next one.
Because it never ends, Lauren. We say bye to 2022 and we get ready for 2024.
That's right. And we got a mayor's race in there too.
God,
So
it just never
we'll do
ends.
that one as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.